So today, on this day of confessions, I have a confession to make. This will come as no surprise to people who know me, but I am a bit of a control freak. I like things the way I like them. I like it when things go according to my plan. I like it when I am in charge and my plans work. I make no apologies for this trait, but I do acknowledge that this particular trait can be a little bit difficult for the other people in my life who also have plans, who also like to be in control, who also want things to go the way they want them to go. Yet I believe this longing for control is a very human characteristic. We believe that we are in control. We have plans and we want them to be followed in a way that we envision them. But the truth is, there are many things in our lives that are beyond our control. For example, we don't determine if we get sick. We can't keep our loved ones safe. We can't control the other drivers on the road. And we don't control if or when we meet the loves of our lives. We don't like to think or talk about this truth, but acknowledging that we are not in control is very, very scary. It is frightening to admit that we have limited power over some of the most important things in our lives. However, one of the most important themes of the High Holy Days is us coming face to face with this reality. We have no choice but to concede this very truth, especially when we read the solemn, dreaded, and powerful Unatana Tokef prayer. This prayer, above all else, lays out our deepest fears and forces us to directly confront questions about life and death. Some of the lines of the Unatana Tokef read, on Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass away from this world? How many shall be born into it? Who shall live and who shall die? Who shall reap the ripeness of old age, and who shall be taken before their time? Who by fire, who by water? Who by war, who by beast? Who by famine, who by drought? Who by earthquake, and who by plague? And on these questions go. In the Hebrew it reads, Mi yihyeh mi yamut. Who shall live and who shall die? In these questions, the Unatana Tokef accepts that there are forces beyond our control and that our power over our own lives is limited, and emphasizes that we have no idea and finite agency over what is going to happen over our lives in any given year. And I can't think of a year when we have learned this lesson more than we have in 2020. No one could have predicted last Rosh Hashanah that we would collectively be living through a year like this one. Mi yihyeh v'mi yamut. Who shall live and who shall die? As a global society, this has been the question on our lips and our hearts and on our minds since the coronavirus began taking its devastating toll. Each day, thousands of people in our cities, in our states, in our country, and around the world have been dying from this devastating pandemic. At the time of our recording, there have been almost 190,000 deaths in the US from the coronavirus and its related illnesses. We hear stories of people who are healthy one day going about living their daily lives when they have contracted this virus and they can't recover from it. I know people who have lost their loved ones. I have done these funerals and I have counseled their families. So the question about who shall live and who shall die, mi yihyeh v'mi yamut, feels like it is ever present on our minds. The Unatana Tokef voices our deepest fears in this central question, who shall live and who shall not. And we see this fear as a society because we have now been living with it for months. This is the fear that has kept our kids out of school for months. It keeps our loved ones apart, and it leads us to living these very bizarre socially distanced lives. We know and understand this primal fear all too well. We have been living with it for months, and truthfully, we have no idea how much longer we will be doing so. But we keep asking ourselves this same question, who shall live and who shall die? Our fears, our experience, and our current situation is literally written into this prayer. Who will see ripe old age, and who will be taken too young? Who by earthquake, and who by plague? Who by plague? These are the questions that keep us up at night. There are many different theories and legends about the origins of this prayer, but who actually wrote it remains unclear. The Unetane Tokef contains many biblical references and imagery, which only underscores its importance by connecting back to our central text. But even as this beautiful, solemn, difficult prayer captures our current moment, I need to voice that I have always struggled with this prayer, and especially the dark theology within it. The images of God in this prayer are so dark that it says even the angels are trembling with fear. The Unetane Tokef paints a picture of God who writes names into books, into the book of life, or not. Here God is revisiting all of our actions, all of our words, all of our deeds from the past year. And based on the sum total of all of these things, God literally judges us, deciding if our behavior is worthy of living another year. God weighs the value of every living soul and decides who has earned the right to be written into the book of life. If we are written into the book of life, if we are lucky enough for that to happen, then we must pass the same test the next year, and on and on and on. The theology of the Unetane Tokef paints a picture of a God that we as Reformed Jews don't normally like to think about. A God who has the power to decide if we are going to live or not. And even though I know we are not in control of who gets sick, I still struggle with the image of God sitting in judgment of our lives in this way, and deciding which one of us is worthy to be written into the book of life. I wrestle with the concept of God sitting with these two books, deciding who is going to live. I do not believe that God is our judge, our plaintiff, our counselor, and our witness to our lives. This theology does not work for me, nor is it my concept of God. While I acknowledge we are not in control of the length of our days, I do not and cannot believe in a God that decides our fate based on our action and then decides which one of these books to write us into. But there is still this question, mi yihye v'mi yamut, who shall live and who shall die, that haunts our days of our life. The Unetane Tokef provides an answer to this question about the things that we can do to impact our own fate. Utshuva, utefila, usadaka. It reads, repentance, prayer, and charity, temper judgment, severe decree. This is the translation that is in the Gates of Repentance, the book that Reformed Jews used for decades. Another translation of the same line is, and repentance, prayer, and charity cancel this decree. And our new mocks are Mishkan HaNefesh, it reads, but through the return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of this decree. If we think about these answers as literal, then it is the most disturbing theological part for me. I am especially troubled by the lines about repentance, prayer, and charity canceling this harsh decree, because we all know too many good people who have passed away. Literally, this implies that God did not think they merited being written into the book of life, or perhaps their behavior did not merit God's approval. If this theology is taken further, then it seems like this prayer is actually blaming them for their own death. Is it saying that their acts of repentance, prayer, and charity were not sufficient enough to save their lives? If so, then this theological idea is absolutely abhorrent to me, and I could imagine it is to many of you. When previous generations of Reform rabbis were putting together the High Holy Day prayer book, they found the Unetane Tokef prayer so deeply problematic that they took it out of the liturgy. They did not want this prayer and its disturbing theology to be part of our High Holy Day experience. I understand the concerns, and I do deeply struggle with this prayer. But as upsetting as I find it, I think it is essential that we revisit this Unetane Tokef prayer every year. I think it is important that we face these questions, and especially in a year like this one, the one that we are living through now. More than any other prayer in our High Holy Day liturgy, the Unetane Tokef voices the questions that we avoid asking the rest of the year. In this prayer, we have no choice but to acknowledge that the length of our days is limited. We are forced to come face to face with this reality and focus on what we want to achieve in the time that we have. It can help us collectively and individually use our control, our agency, and our power to strive for the best for ourselves and the best in our world. So if we think of the answers of repentance, prayer, and charity not as ways to impact the length of our days, but as guides for how we should spend them, then I believe there is wisdom in these lines. We can view the Unatana Tokef as being like God's alarm clock. God is giving us a wake-up call, and the key to this wake-up call comes in these three words, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. If we think of tshuva as meaning not only repentance, but also as return. Tshuva can mean a return to our roots, to our faith, to our traditions, to our values. If we return to the core of who we are, then it can help us have a more meaningful tefillah, a more meaningful spiritual life. And if we do so, then we can also be more open to charity and giving and to the pain of the rest of the world around us. Using the Unatana Tokef as God's alarm clock, we can engage more deeply in what is going on around us in the world. We can work for a better world because it is truly at the core of who we are. It is at the center of our beliefs, our values, and our traditions as Jews. We can and we should strive for a better world because this is what this prayer inspires us to do. The Unatana Tokef can also be read as a call for social justice. It is urging us to use the time that we have to work for a better and a more just world. The key to this is to stop questions like who shall live and who shall die from becoming an injustice. And if there is ever a time to take that on, it is now. In 2020, we have seen that the coronavirus hit communities harder than others. Some were definitely impacted more deeply than others. According to the CDC, more people are sick with the coronavirus, and the death rates are significantly higher in counties with large African American populations. From the time when COVID-19 began to spread in the US, communities of color have been disproportionately burdened by this disease. Counties with larger African American population faced higher counts of COVID-19. There were increased mortality rates, and there was a faster pace of seriousness of disease progressing within these communities, especially when compared with other counties, ones with lower shares of African American people. So the question of who shall live and who shall die, who by earthquake and who by plague, seem even more relevant now than ever. And not only because of the coronavirus, but also in 2020, we have seen the plague of systemic racism take the life of far too many people this year. Over and over again, we have witnessed the death of people of color in horrific and abhorrent ways. So again, the question of who shall live and who shall die, mi yihyeh v'mi yamut, is one that we as a society have to ask ourselves this year. The Unatana Tokef is urging us to see the pain and the suffering of others and to connect with it as if it were our own. It is a call to stop the question of who shall live and who shall die from being a continued injustice. It urges each and every one of us to step up to return our world to the right path. It is reminding us that our days are limited, but to use the time that we have to work for good, to work for tikkun olam. These are words to live by. They ask us to return to the values and the ideas and our core beliefs and the ways of our tradition. And to act in this way, we can begin with ourselves. The Unatana Tokef urges us to partner with God and with each other so we can work for a better world. We can begin to actualize the society that we know we can achieve, one that we all want to live in. So in addition to the communal prompt of the Unatana Tokef, I believe that this prayer is also pushing us individually to work on ourselves. Throughout the High Holy Days, we are tasked with reflecting on our own behavior in the past year. We ask ourselves what we did well and where are areas that we can improve. We are ever striving to become better people and to be the best versions of ourselves. And the Unatana Tokef is asking us individually to contemplate about ourselves. What parts of ourselves do we want to live? And what parts of ourselves do we want to die? What parts of ourselves do we want to foster and thrive? and what parts are we ready to let go of? When we do those things, when we ask ourselves this question, then we can really figure out who we want to be as individuals in the year to come. So as the High Holy Days, and especially the Unetana Tokef reminds us, the length of our days is not up to us, but what we do with our time is. And fostering the best in ourselves, we can move ever closer to achieving the potential that is within us and in the world around us. Inspired by the Unetana Tokef, we can act in ways that cultivates growth for our community and for ourselves. We can change the way we hear this prayer, so instead of saying, who will live, meaning who will survive, we can use this question, who will live, as an aspiration so all people can flourish. The Unetana Tokef reminds us that our time is limited, but it is imperative for us to use the time that we have so we can live as our best selves and so we can work for the fact that all people and all society can truly, finally, and absolutely thrive. May we all be able to live up to this call from the Unetana Tokef in the year ahead. Shana Tova.